you'll see a bit more intro about myself. So my name is Cheryl. I'm the Director of Ecosystem at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is a sub-foundation underneath the Linux Foundation, which of course hosts Linux among many, many other open source projects. So I started out as a software engineer at Google, building large distributed systems and deploying it using Borg. And Borg, kind of famously, is the predecessor to Kubernetes. So since I left Google in 2015, I've spent most of my time and effort on bringing this kind of style, which we're now calling cloud native computing, out to lots and lots of other companies and organizations via the CNCF. And I'll also note that I founded and run the Cloud Native London meetup, which, like everything else, is an online virtual meetup at the moment, but it's got more than 5,000 members. We're one of the largest cloud native meetups, one of the largest active ones in London. So if you're interested in this, then I do host meetups of my own on the first Wednesday of every month. And you can find me on Twitter at @OyCheryl.
Just to add a note to that, I have been to Cheryl's events. I've been to one of your physical events. It was at Sainsbury's, if I remember correctly. And I know we're doing all online at the moment, but your venue was awesome. The people you had speaking was great. And the atmosphere was really good. I met so many amazing people. So I highly recommend joining the community and getting involved.
Oh, so nice to hear that, Eddie. And yeah, I very much miss meeting people in person as well. So I'm hoping we can come back to doing those face-to-face events one day.
Hopefully soon, fingers crossed.
So let's go to the next slide. So within the actual CNCF, what do I do? So my mission is to drive the adoption of projects like Kubernetes, Prometheus, Envoy, and there's more than 40 now hosted within CNCF. So I focus primarily on the end users, and this is this group of about 150 companies who don't sell any kind of cloud services. They're not vendors of products. They're just trying to build their infrastructure and make the right technical decisions and figure out how to navigate the open source world. And one of the challenges that I've seen with this group of companies is that a lot of end users don't have the ability to say what they're doing publicly, right? Because there's legal barriers or there's PR barriers within a closed group, and this group is mostly closed. They can talk pretty freely, but if you ask them to talk about what they're doing publicly, it's pretty difficult. So over the last 2 years, I've heard a lot of really, really great discussions within this group via calls and on the mailing list and on the Slack channel, but none of that comes outside of this group. So part of my goal of launching this was to bring some of those discussions, like some of the real experiences that these companies are facing, and bring them more widely, like actually publish them, show the public what these end users are really thinking about. Next slide.
I just want to say, so there's some really big names on there. I mean, some that stand out, like there's MasterCard, Monzo, GoPro, Bloomberg, wow, Audi, Apple. Okay, I won't name them all, but I'm just like blown away. It's really impressive.
It's a really cool group of companies to work with, to be honest. And yeah, I think a lot of these companies are part of this group because, number one, they want to find out what other end users are doing and talk to other end users. But number two, because they also want to share their own experiences and just help other people in other companies. So it's a very sort of nice, very active, interactive community.
And I think you got a nice message as well. Someone saying hi from the audience. Oh, I did bring it up for a second. There we go.
Hi, Layal. Hi, good to meet you as well. So this initiative is really coming from the end user community, as I said. So my goal is to share what these end user companies, this 150 group of companies, are really using and what they recommend. and look at some of the patterns of usage across companies as well. And then I think this is also important because I know that, Eddie, you're really into open source, and all of us like are really interested and, keen on open source. But I think it's also important to recognize the reality of cloud native, which is that people use proprietary, tools and technologies. They use non-CNCF stuff. They've got to integrate all of these options with their existing stacks. So I think that's the second principle that I had behind this, which is that the key is to show reality, right? So I'll talk through in the rest of our time now about this format that I've settled on, which is the technology radar, inspired by ThoughtWorks. Talk about how I was thinking about the first one and how we've designed it and built it, and then look at the actual results of it. And the first one was about continuous delivery. Next slide.
I was just going to jump in with a question, if that's okay. And
Go for it.
So I was going to ask, what is cloud native? But then before we do that, Vamsi has asked, and this can be a big discussion, so we won't go into it in too much detail now, but has asked, why cloud? And do a lot of the people in the group always use a public cloud? Do they use their own private cloud, or do they use something else?
Let me answer the second question first. Okay. So I would say that 60% of the group use public cloud, probably another 20% are on-prem, and then maybe another 20% use a hybrid of public and their own clouds. So the question of why cloud really comes down to, what do you want to spend your time on? And for the majority of companies, building infrastructure is not why, their business does well. Like Adidas, right? Adidas sells sportswear and sports items. Like, nobody is buying Adidas stuff because they use on-prem or because they're using cloud. So using cloud is just a way of saying, I want to kind of hand off. I would rather, have someone else run that bit of the infrastructure and focus my time and my company's time on things that are a differentiator for us as a business. Just like most companies don't design and build their own hardware, because it's a huge amount of effort for probably not that much business value.
That's a really good way to put it. I really like that. You're so right in that sometimes we do argue or discuss a lot about, should we use something off the shelf? Should we build it ourselves? Be it, I don't know, like a framework or something like that. And then and you're right, when we go to the cloud, that's not the business value. There's other business value that they need to focus on. So by using the cloud, you're absolutely right. And a good example of that was the hardware. We don't all go build our own computers and components and all the rest. We buy those off the shelf and customize it as we need. So I think that's actually a really good example for people to understand that.
I do think that this sort of thing happens over time as well. So, initially everyone was building their own infrastructure. And for example, companies often find that their utilization rate is terrible. It's like, 10 or 20%. So you've way overbought the infrastructure that you don't need, right? And cloud is much more flexible in that way, because you can just say, I need more today, I'll just dial it back tomorrow. So you don't have to, buy for the amount that you have for the Black Friday or Christmas periods. You just need to use as much as you're using today.
That's very true. So it's more efficient in that sense. It's not just about efficient in time, but it's also efficient in money, because you only pay for what you need.
It can be, to be fair. I do understand some people say like cloud is more expensive than owning your own infrastructure. And that's probably true to some extent. But the question is, how much more expensive is it to hire people and to focus your company on running things that instead don't add business value? So, it's a choice. I think that's why some of the companies I've seen have a hybrid model. So, the majority of their stuff would be on-prem, and then the rest, they go to the cloud if needed. Okay, we should
Makes
probably
sense.
move on. I think we probably
Yeah.
talked enough about cloud. So, um, okay, so what's a technology radar? Go next slide. So, a technology radar is an opinionated guide to a set of emerging technologies. So, ThoughtWorks came up with the format and they've been using it for more than 10 years now. And this is their latest one. So their 10th radar. And if you haven't seen this before, then the way to read this radar is that things in the middle are considered more stable and mature and ready to use. And then things towards the outside are less widely adopted, or people are moving away from them to other technologies. So in this one, you can see that there's about 100 items and they're divided into 4 segments. So techniques, platforms, tools, languages and frameworks. And then the things that are in the middle ring, the closest ring to the center, are called adopt. And then the one after that is called trial. Further out from that is assess. And then the outermost ring is called hold. Eddie, I guess, are you familiar with the ThoughtWorks radar?
I am. I do enjoy when it comes out every year. And that's actually a good question to ask to people watching. Have they heard of ThoughtWorks, and have they heard of the ThoughtWorks radar? I highly recommend subscribing to it, because you're right. They do cover, frameworks, libraries, testing tools, and a whole raft of technologies. And I actually got invited to one of their private offsite events at ThoughtWorks, which you can't buy tickets for love or money. So it was really interesting to see that and see the other technologies that they were slowly bringing in onto the radar. And I do use a few of those that have now made it onto the radar. So yeah, it is quite interesting. I do like it. I think it's a really good concept. And I think it's great that you've built your tech radar from this as well, rather than reinventing
Oh,
the
that's
wheel.
cool. Yeah. I would love to hear your feedback as well, Eddie, about from your little private on-site with ThoughtWorks, how they think about it versus how CNCF is thinking about it. So yeah, and I definitely love if anybody has any feedback about this or ways to make it better. I'm very much open to it. So if you go to the next slide, I'm going to be more precise about those 4 rings. So the middle one is adopt, which is clear recommendation. We think everybody should be definitely using this because it's been widely used and across lots and lots of different teams and lots of different use cases. The second most ring is called trial. Trial is we've used it, we've seen some success, and we think you should take a closer look at this. And the third one is assess, which is we've tried it out and it seems promising. Maybe it is lacking certain features, or maybe it's only good for certain use cases. But if you have a need for it, then you should consider looking at the technologies in this ring. And then the fourth one, the hold one, is a bit different from the first 3. So the first 3 say, we think you should try it. We think we can recommend it to a certain extent. And then the fourth one is we think that this technology is starting to fade away and other technologies are better options if you're looking for something today. And I think that is important to stress, that this is a snapshot in time. Like, if every time that ThoughtWorks does this exercise, the technologies that are in these different areas, different rings, will change. And that's part of the format itself.
Just to clarify on the hold status, could it also be new technology that's something to keep an eye on, but maybe don't just quite use it yet, like it's up and coming, as well as ones that are going that are slowly not becoming so popular, or slowly dying out or becoming deprecated?
Yeah, it totally could be. And part of that is because this is subjective. So it's really up to the editor's opinion about whether something that's new and hasn't had a lot of people trying it, whether that would go in assess or whether it would go in hold.
That makes sense. There's always going to be a bit of a are partial to the person, I guess, organizing and collating the data, which I think is great that you're really open and honest about it. I think some people would be like, yeah, this is what the data says, and then not so. There was a little bit of bias, I suppose, as much as you try to be objective.
Yeah, totally. I mean, we're all humans, so we have to try and be fair, but say that this is the opinion of fundamentally the editor of this. So let me sort of describe some differences between the ThoughtWorks radar versus what I've been thinking about with the CNCF technology radar. So the most important difference is that the ThoughtWorks radar is the opinion of a single company or consultancy in the case of ThoughtWorks, whereas I wanted to make this community driven. So the data comes from the 150 companies in the end user community. The representatives from the community will decide what the final radar looks like. And so I want to step away from, instead of it being the viewpoint of a single company, I want this to be a viewpoint across companies. The second biggest change is that we decided to keep only the middle three rings, so assess, trial, and adopt, and drop the hold ring, the outermost one, for two reasons. One is that even if you tell people hold does not mean bad, people still tend to think like that. And it can be deeply unfair to place a project in hold because, as you said, maybe it doesn't have enough information or it's too new or whatever. So we wanted to avoid that kind of confusion. And then kind of related to that is that I think that the meaning of the first three rings are quite clear. And then the meaning of the fourth ring is actually quite different from those first three. So just as a sort of, because I feel like it's right, it's clearer and easier to understand when, you have adopt, trial, and assess, and then you don't have one which is meaning something completely different. So I hope that's fair, because I know some people have said like, oh, we really want to see what's in hold as well. So fair enough. But that was my reason for it.
I know I would like to see what's on hold as well. So I do understand that. I do.
Yeah, like I totally get that, right? People want to see what things other people, recommend against as well. But at least in the first case, I wanted to make sure that it was quite unambiguous what these mean. And then maybe later we can always adjust it and, once people get used to the idea. And then the other big change is that the ThoughtWorks radar, they publish, 100 items once a year, right? And instead of doing that, I wanted to do 10 to 20 items every quarter. And that's for two reasons again. One is that it just simplifies it. Like I think 100 is really quite hard to read. Even on that slide, you can't read the text, right? It's just too small to see. And then the second reason is that all of this technology is changing really, really quickly. And if you wait a year, you're going to be behind. So, following good continuous delivery principles, you should do smaller, more frequent releases instead of, larger and less frequent ones. So I wanted to focus and say every quarter we'll pick a use case and do one tech radar on that use case. The first one that we decided to go for was continuous delivery. So in the next few slides, I'll talk about how we actually collected the data and built it, and then people can see. I would love to see if people agree with the results or if they think that they would have done it differently. So the first step on this was to create a Google spreadsheet. So this is just an ordinary Google spreadsheet. And down the left-hand side, you can see not all, but a list of continuous delivery tools. And then I asked each company in that group of 150 companies to add a column for themselves and pick whether they would put it in adopt, trial, assess, or hold within their own companies. I also invited them to leave a comment on the spreadsheet to say, explain why they chose to put it in this level. And I also said, if you are using something that isn't already listed, then please add it down to the left-hand side. So both the options and the answers came from the companies themselves. And then another critical point to see in this is that this was not anonymized within the end user community. So all of the companies in the end user community could see which companies are using what projects. So if we go to the next slide, here are the results that I got. So this turned out to be a very wide spreadsheet. So there's 33 columns here, and I've blacked out the names of the companies because, as I said, the end users don't usually have the legal and PR approval to say what they're using publicly. And then also this is color coded just for visual effects. So you can see green for adopt, blue for trial, yellow for assess, and red for hold. Cool. And then the next idea was to, instead of looking, vertically at each company, to look horizontally across the projects. So I've just sorted these. So I pushed all the adopts to one side and trials and assess and hold after, just to make it easier to see. And then this is where the editorial subjectivity comes in. I decided which ones seemed like they had broad positive consensus and therefore should go in adopt, versus which ones were in trial and which ones were in assess. So as you can see from here, so Flux and Helm, I think had a reasonable number of companies adopting them. Helm in particular had quite a few. Circle CI, GitLab, and Customize went into trial because they had an okay number of companies who positively recommend adopt, and maybe just a few, one or two, who said they put it on hold. And then pretty much everything else where there was no clear consensus went into assess. So some of these, you can see they only had 2 answers. So there just wasn't enough information for me to say, positive recommendation or not. Jenkins is the widest bar across here. That's kind of not a surprise because within CD, most people have heard of Jenkins and most people have tried it. But it's interesting to note that more than 50% of the companies said that they've put it on hold.
It's interesting also that Jenkins X, I thought Jenkins X would be more popular because I know they're doing a big push on that. And I have someone coming on my stream in a few weeks to talk about Jenkins X and give a demo. So I'm surprised, but I guess with lots of cloud options now as well, people might be going for those ones. I recognize some of the other names. GitHub Actions is quite new as well. Sorry, go on.
I will talk about the cloud options in just a minute, but I think that's really interesting to see that what things you recognize and what things you expected to be there versus not.
I thought GitHub Actions might be a bit more popular, but it is very new, and it's so new that I think a lot of places are taking time to adopt it. Circle CI, I get it, it's very kind of enterprise, and same with GitLab. I'm surprised not to see Kubernetes on there.
So I think Kubernetes was taken as a given somewhat.
Okay.
Like Kubernetes was not considered specifically a continuous delivery option. But there, you do make I think it is important to note that this group of 150 companies has its own biases, right? Like they tend to be companies that are actively pursuing cloud native. So they tend to be like ones that are slightly more, invested into the cloud native journey. They tend to be a little bit bigger. Well, as you saw, because you saw a lot of big names there, right? So they're big enough to not just consider themselves as a user of a technology, but a company that actually wants to get involved with open source and contribute time towards it. So I'm sure that if you took a different sample of companies, like, you'd get slightly different results.
That's true. And I think you raise a really good point that when a company starts contributing back to open source, I think it separates that separates themselves, and they go to the next level of using that technology, because they're not only just using it, they actually believe in making it better and want to give back, and they're making time. So I do see some of my clients, they do make improvements to some technologies or write wrappers or connectors, but they never give it back to the community, and either to the core project or to a fork or their own one, but they just say, "Oh, we just haven't got time to just make it community friendly. It just needs to do the bare minimum just to get our stuff done." But I think that's what separates a lot of companies, is the ones that make the effort to put value and effort into the open source side, which then I believe they will reap the benefits 10 times if they do that.
Totally agree. I mean, that's why I work for an open source foundation, right? Like, I really fundamentally believe that if you contribute towards open source, then you will get that back, as you said, 10 times in the future. But it does take sort of active investment into that, and sort of willingness to say, yeah, like, this might not directly, sell any products for us, but we still want to do it because we think it's the right thing to do.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of places, this is probably another discussion for another time, but just to finish up with, I think a lot of companies think it's a sprint rather than a marathon. They do it for like a month and they go, well, I haven't got any more results. I can't, my hiring process hasn't got easier, my X, Y, and Z haven't got better. And it takes time. They go, oh, we haven't got enough. They like the vanity metrics. I haven't got enough stars on my repo. It's obviously not very good. And it's like, but that's a vanity metric. This actually doesn't mean anything. But they've got to do it for the long game, definitely.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I have companies asking me all the time, like, how do I get influence into projects? I'm like, well, you dedicate some developers to work on that and do that consistently for 6 months at least, and then that's how you gain influence. But people want the sort of quick, like, oh, can I pay to get something in here? Can I whatever? You're like, not really, no.
I've heard that one before. Question for the audience: let me know if your company contributes to open source and kind of what sort of level you think it's at. It'd be interesting to know with the people we've got watching. But sorry, Cheryl, carry on.
Yeah. So where we were at was we collected the data. So 33 companies gave their information, and they gave 177 data points. So we looked at them horizontally across the different individual projects and sorted them and said, well, roughly speaking from the pattern, I think Flux and Helm should be in adopt, and then these 3 in trial, and then most of the rest went into assess.
I'll ask one more question. What is Flux and Helm? I understand Helm is almost like Ubuntu's apt or Mac's brew for Kubernetes. Is that correct? So you can share packages between projects and companies.
Perfect. So yeah, it's a package manager for Kubernetes. Flux is more of I want to get this right. So I think let me come back to this question, because I can tell you sort of vaguely what it is, but I feel like if I say Flux is this and it's wrong, then people are going to jump on it and be like, yeah.
Well, that's fine, So we don't know all the answers. We like to think we know something, and that's what we're sharing. And if anyone can make any suggestions or improvements to what it is, then they feel free. They can jump in, I guess. Not a problem.
Oh yeah. If anyone else knows what Flux is in detail, put it in the chat and let everybody know.
Awesome.
Okay. So now we've got the projects that are in the different rings, and then the last step is to look at the 3 themes. So if you go to the next slide, this is again the editorial judgment. So what are things that you might have expected to see that were not there, or what were things that you you didn't see, or like were just anyway interesting or surprising or whatever. And bear in mind that, again, like this is one set of opinions at one point in time. So this is not, it can never be purely objective. It can never be like absolute truth, but it is one viewpoint as seen by 33 companies.
Okay, so is the next slide the actual results?
Minus a section slide, yes.
Okay,
So
I'm really excited. Okay, yeah, right, section slide.
Yeah, now we see the actual results.
The actual results, and then I do have a question for you afterwards about, because you mentioned 33 companies, so I do have a question. The results.
Yeah, the results. Here we go. And this is not a surprise in a way, because we just told you what those results are. But this is just laid out in a graphical format. So firstly, you can see that it's only a half circle. It's not actually the full radar, because it just makes it easier to see on a smaller screen. And then the way to read this radar is that Flux and Helm are in adopt because they had the broadest positive consensus. Slightly less positive consensus was Circle CI, Customize, and GitLab, and those are in trial. And then here are lots of other tools and technologies that people use, but there was no consensus, or not enough consensus to say positively for or against. And also bear in mind that all this data and the spreadsheet was done in May 2020. So it's fairly recent data.
I think that's important to clarify that it is very recent. This is not done like a year ago where the landscapes could have changed a lot. So this is very recent, which I think is important.
Totally. The timeliness of this is important. And that, as you said before, like GitHub Actions is relatively new. So that's why it's in assess. It's not in assess because it's bad. It's in assess because not enough companies have used it to a great enough extent to say within their own companies, like, yes, we positively recommend that you should use GitHub Actions. So I hope that makes sense. I hope people understand that.
I wonder, because this is your first one, I have a suggestion, and maybe we can discuss it more later on, but just so I don't forget. So you've got your first one, which is my suggestion is not going to work for your first one. But for your second, third, fourth one, you can see if things are getting more popular or less popular. And so, for example, if GitHub Actions stays in assess still, but has gained, 20% more interest, then you could put an arrow pointing inwards that it is moving inward to what it was previously, and say, for example, this doesn't mean anything by the way, but Travis CI, say it's become 20% less popular than the previous radar, you could have an arrow pointing outwards to say it could change, it could come back in, but at the moment in time, compared to the previous time, it's kind of on its way out rather than on its way in. I don't know if that's more work or not. It probably is.
So this is something that ThoughtWorks does, right? For their radar, they track things over time, right? So I did actually consider whether I wanted to keep that or not. And I've decided against it because the idea is that every quarter we would do a different use case. Okay. So the set of projects on this would be different every time. Next time could be around security, it could be around storage, could be around serverless. Like, there's dozens and dozens of different options, different use cases that you could look at using this format. So continuous delivery is probably not going to come up again for at least a year, if not more. Who knows? So the tracking over time is not quite as obvious.
Now that makes sense. I forgot that you did mention that you're planning to change the type each time. I completely forgot about that. So you are right. It wouldn't make as much sense.
But like it does make sense from the ThoughtWorks radar, where it is, probably at least 50% of the technologies are going to be the same from year to year, or not the same 50%, but it's not like it's going to change over completely. So you do actually want to see the trends over time and the movement over time. This one is more just like, okay, here is a snapshot in time. Like, what do people think about continuous delivery in June of 2020? And then next time continuous delivery comes up, like, who knows, like the projects might look completely different.
And the landscape's changing all the time as well, I suppose. If you do this a year later, the cloud native space is changing so fast that it could be quite different. You could have a lot more names on there that we didn't know of a year and a half before.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I think this is one of the things that makes it fun, that things are always changing and there's always new stuff coming in. But yeah, it makes it quite hard to do things on an annual basis because things change faster than that, in my opinion and in my experience. Cool. So next I'm going to talk about the 3 themes that I saw. So I acted as editor for this particular radar. So I collected the data from the actual end user companies, but I was the one who decided where they should end up, and I wrote these themes. And the idea is in the future, the community representatives would do this. But these are the things that I saw. So one was that many of the end user companies had tried a lot of different options and settled on more than one. So quite often they had sort of tied a few different options together and then published some of part of that to open source themselves. So examples of this are Release Manager from Lunaway, Box's Cube Applier, and Stacked Set Controller from Zalando, all of which you can check out. And this is where, Eddie, you mentioned this as well, about public cloud managed options. So some of those would be, I think it's AWS Code, maybe it's, one is called Code Pipelines. I forget which one is which now, but none of those were actually on this radar, which surprised me a little bit. And that could be because those were the actual options. Maybe a few years ago when these companies were choosing CD solutions, they were lacking the features that they wanted, or it could indicate an actual preference for running CD in-house as opposed to, using a managed option.
It's true. There are certain rules. So I've worked at some high street banks, and I remember a lot of them saying we have to use on-prem, and it had to be from this supplier, for example, because they already had an agreement with them, so we could just buy more licenses as we needed from them. And where others have just said, oh, it's an R&D project, you can use on cloud if we don't want to manage it. So I think there is a bit of a history there with the companies, in that it's hard to make a change from what they're already doing sometimes.
Yeah, and that's part of the reality of this as well. So, but it's more of a like an indication that this is something interesting, rather than it's not a like saying anything negative about having cloud managed options. It just means nobody said they're actively using it. Okay, second theme. The second one is about Helm. So we talked about this a minute ago, that Helm is the package manager for Kubernetes. It's not usually considered a CD tool, but Helm actually not only was on this, but ended up in the adopt ring. Like, it was widely adopted as part of a CD solution. So again, that surprised me. And then the third one is the one that since this came out, I've had the absolute most flack about. The biggest set of reactions is about Jenkins, mainly because everybody knows Jenkins and everybody has an opinion about it. So I think I had, half people saying, everybody knows Jenkins, it should be higher. And then the other half would say, nobody uses Jenkins anymore. Like, why is it on there? Get rid of it. And I think that's reflected in the results that we saw, where, lots of people had tried Jenkins, but more than 50% said they no longer suggest adopting Jenkins. So again, that doesn't mean Jenkins is bad, right? It just means if you're looking for a CD solution today, then you should consider Jenkins, but you should also consider some more cloud native solutions. So Flux that we saw there for a moment ago, I think it is an operator for Kubernetes, but I forget exactly what it does. But I'm aware that it supports GitOps, for example. So if that is a priority for you, then you should look at, Flux and some of the other options rather than just going to Jenkins because, everybody knows Jenkins.
When you, I'm just going to bring up Jacob's answer to that. And while people are reading that, I was going to ask you a question. When you mention Jenkins, do you include Jenkins X as well in that? Or is that separate? I know it's kind of very different to the original Jenkins.
I've been a bit vague about that. That's fair. And thank you, Jakob, for the answer. You said Flux is for applying things to Kubernetes through Git. So yeah, that is exactly the GitOps model, right? You commit something into Git and then it applies it to Kubernetes. So thank you for the clarification. Do I consider Jenkins and Jenkins X separately? In this one, I've mostly considered it separately, but the other options around Jenkins, they showed up, but as you said before, like Jenkins X, in this particular group of companies, there didn't seem to be many people actively using Jenkins X. So I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I was just trying to digest the information. That's why I was pausing for a moment.
Yeah, no, it is quite a challenge to sort of read this, especially if you're looking at it for the first time. But one of the things, if you actually go back to the visual layout of the radar in this, and something I've heard from companies as well, is they've said, this has brought Flux up to the top of the list of things that we want to investigate. So I think that's exactly the right way to look at this. Like if someone asked me, what should I be using for continuous delivery if I needed an option right now, I wouldn't say like, okay, use Flux and Helm. I would say, the cloud native landscape is absolutely vast. There's thousands of options out there. But if you want to prioritize based on what other people are looking at and using, then here is a guide that will say like, look at Flux and Helm first, and then look at these three and look at these other options. Of course, taking into account, your own features that you need and your existing technology stack and all the other things that are going to be different about your environment. But it's just a way to sort of give some guidance to people to say like, here's like how you can prioritize different technologies or prioritize investigating different technology.
I think that's important. I think when people are looking to change, they do need to do a spike on that technology and just see what features it has. Does it fit their workflow that they want to do and all the rest, rather than going on a hype and a buzz. So I think you're right. Doing the investigation piece is really important.
And it's quite overwhelming as well, right? In open source, there's 1,000 tools for everything. And, it's very hard to say. Like, I think that's why people love the GitHub stars, right? People go, oh, like, here's a number that says, is it good or not? Like, it's a very shallow proxy for...
It is a vanity metric, but I think it's good at the beginning, like when a project is very new. If you have 1 star versus 100, it does make a difference. But I think when you kind of get to, I'm making this number up as an example, like 10,000 versus 20 versus kind of 30, it's just showing that it's more popular. It doesn't necessarily mean it's more stable or more contributed to. And I think that's where they need to dig into the activity, the contributors tab, and see kind of actually how many people are contributing. So I think that adds more value than just the stars. But on smaller, newer projects, I think that's how it starts. So I do get that. But on the bigger projects, I think people need to dig a bit deeper, and hopefully one day, GitHub maybe has some sort of rating. Sounds really harsh, and they probably will never do that, but just some sort of, I don't know, maybe activity rating or stable rating or something to amalgamate some of this information. Maybe they take stars into consideration, but it has a very small lower weighting compared to different contributors and compared to core contributors. Because if you have, I don't know, 100 contributors, but there's only one real main core contributor, I feel that project's quite at risk. Whereas if there's 20 kind of real core contributors that are pushing the project forward, then that has a lower risk factor, and I think it's better as well as a whole. That's just me thinking out loud.
It certainly is, like, undeniably, right? Like one of the difficulties with picking a new solution is that it's quite risky. Like there's always a risk that you're going to choose something that, 2 or 3 years down the line just has fallen out of favor and nobody's using it anymore and the contributors have lost interest. So understanding the health of the community and the contributors behind it, I think is part of the assessment that you have to do if you're a company that is looking to adopt something.
I like that word health. That's much better than activity that I said. Health. That's much better. It's health of the project and health of the community that supports the project. So that's really good. Okay, I'm going to steal that word. Thank you.
Please do. I mean, in fact, it's one of the big things behind that CNCF does. Like people ask, well, what does CNCF do? Is it all about running Twitter and, running blog posts? And actually, that is kind of what CNCF does, but the reason for it is to maintain the health of the community and maintain the people who are, going to be interested in it. And of course, like contributors after a couple of years might get bored and move on. So you need to bring in new people to contribute as well. So it's all about sustaining the community over time.
And hopefully we'll get time at the end. We'll have a quick look at your GitHub organization and just maybe talk through a few of the projects you got there if people want to get involved and contribute. Because I know my community is very an advocate of getting involved in open source. So hopefully we'll get time and have a quick look at your organization. I have got it ready on a tab to show.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, we should definitely do that. In fact, we're sort of getting towards the end of the slides now anyway. So I think that'll be a good discussion point for us to keep going.
Okay.
Just go back one from here. So just to note that if you wanted to learn more about this, these are all things that happen within these open source projects are hosted within CNCF. So Helm, Argo, and Flux. And if you want to also read more, we also have case studies which are about continuous delivery, so Babylon Health and Intuit, and you can read those in much more detail. Okay, let's go to what's next.
Sounds good. What's next?
So next slide, yeah. So most importantly, I really, really want this to be a useful resource for people. I mean, the value of this is seeing at least some kind of fair, somewhat objective view on what end users really use and what they recommend and what they care about. So I want to keep iterating on this. I want to make it better. And I absolutely love feedback on this. So if you have feedback, you can contact me on Twitter or you can just email feedback to info@cncf.io. And as we continue running this each quarter, then we'll incorporate those suggestions.
Sounds good.
So
I've just jumped to the next slide, sorry.
Yeah. Next one, the next radar will come out in September 2020. So if you are interested in finding out, what do other people use around security, storage, runtimes, serverless, anything else, then you can go to this link, cncf.io/tech-radar. And in fact, this just redirects to a GitHub issue. So on that GitHub issue, we've already got a very good thread going where people are saying like, hey, can we make this interactive? Like, I want to be able to link to individual points and I want to see the data behind it. What else have people said? People also asked for some metadata about the companies. So what's the sizes of the companies and what industry they're in. So we've also just published that last week, I believe. And then you'll also see I have in that particular GitHub issue, I've put in some of the options, and then people are just doing the thumbs up, say, hey, like, we're interested in learning about whatever. So definitely, if you're interested in seeing what do people use for various cloud native technologies, you can go and vote on that GitHub issue, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you would get it, but we'll take it into account when choosing the next topic.
No, I like that. I think it's really good to get the community involved and feedback into that. I think that's a great idea. So we'll definitely go have a look and vote on some things. In your list down there, I have a question. So you mentioned serverless, and how does serverless tie into all this? Because I love serverless, but I feel, and maybe it's a lack of understanding, and anyone watching, please feel free to jump in, is with serverless, you need less of, like, say if I'm using AWS Lambda, it seems like I need less of this tooling. So yes, I still want CI and CD, but I need less of these tools that you mentioned. Is that correct, or is it have I misunderstood?
You are correct, and that's part of the point about serverless, that you should need less tooling. But that's not to say that there's no tooling needed at all. For instance, you still need somewhere to store data, right? You still need a storage solution. So some people might be using like Amazon AWS RDS, or they might be using S3, or they might be doing something else entirely. And one of the nice things about this visual format, the layout of the radar, is it doesn't actually have to be specific tools. So it could also be techniques. Like if you're interested in asking how many people I'm blanking on the name for this technique, but there is a way using serverless where you know the cold start problem?
Yes, I know it well.
Time, right? So there is a way where you can, and perhaps it's going against the principles of serverless here, but you can package
your whole app
a couple
into one function,
into a single one,
yes.
And then keep it running.
Yes,
and
so,
then
yeah, I have done that. So the idea is you can have one function that listens for the root domain, and then once it goes into the function decides what the kind of the URI is and what kind of sub function, I'm doing air quotes here, should run to solve that. And you're right, it does solve the cold start problem, but introduces other issues as well. So yeah, there's pros and cons, I suppose, to doing things different ways. But it'd be interesting to know who is doing that and who has continued to do that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's that sort of thing where you could certainly see people saying like, well, what are the different approaches to serverless? Not just what techniques you use or what tools you use, but how are you actually using it? And then again, you could lay it out visually where you say like, okay, a lot of companies are doing. Is there a name for this? I don't know if you know, Eddie, or somebody.
I can't remember the name. I didn't know there was one. There must be, and there's a name for everything. There must be a name for it. But yeah, I know the process. I know AWS released an open source library that wrapped Node Express, so you could do that quite easily. And therefore, if you wanted to take it out of serverless, it was just an Express application underneath. So there was, I can't think what they called it, if there was a name for it. But I know what you mean. Hopefully I've explained it enough so people kind of are on the same page as us.
And if somebody else knows the name, then please tell me, because it's going to bug me now. Like, what is this called? But yeah, so that's how this is going to work. And if you want to hear or you want to vote on another upcoming tech radar, then again, please go to that link, cncf.io/tech-radar. And then the next slide is the last one, I believe. So these are for companies who've kind of bought into cloud native already and are interested in finding out like who is actually using which project and reading the actual detailed comments behind it. as I said before, that was a Google spreadsheet, so it was not anonymized. And within the community, people are very happy to share what they're doing and get in touch and talk to people. So if you are interested in that, then you should come and also join the CNCF end user community. And then, as I also said, I ran this one as the editor for the first version of this. For future versions, we're going to take from that 150 companies, we're going to select a few at random and then ask them to form a radar team. And they are going to choose the topics, choose the final radar, and write the themes for the radar. So the idea is I want to sort of remove myself from the process a bit and have it 100% run by the end user community. In fact, I think I've talked about it a little bit like jury duty. You get randomly selected, you have to represent the end user community. But again, that's something that if you're interested in doing, you should also come and join the end user community.
Sounds good. And we've had a couple of questions, and I kind of jumped in with my questions. So let me try and bring some of these up.
Yeah.
Hopefully. So cloud native, why should developers, I know we've touched on this in a few different ways, and maybe we can recap for people that have joined and go into a bit more detail. So why should developers worry or care about cloud native? I know some do naturally because they want to bridge that gap with the ops team and so forth, but what are your thoughts on why should developers be interested in cloud native?
So let me come at this from a personal angle. So I mentioned at the very beginning that I started out as an engineer at Google, and I was writing C++ for Google Maps and deploying it using Borg. But my perspective is very much 100% as a software engineer, as a developer. I was not involved with the SRE or Borg team in any way other than using, what was the services that they provided. So I definitely understand this. I'm a developer. I kind of don't want to care about infrastructure, right? It's not my problem. I just want to be building features. I don't want to be worrying about, is a networking stack the right thing? How are we going to manage replication of storage, blah, blah, blah. I just want to pretend that I've got a perfect, infinitely large computer that never fails, and I just don't have to worry about it. So I definitely understand that that perspective. But I think the reason to get into this is because this is the way that the industry is going. So more and more I see, especially sort of young people, students who have never run any software apart from in a container, like in a Docker container. It's just become the default way that you deploy software for a lot of different tools and technologies. And Kubernetes is kind of going the same way. So you, instead of let's say you're a developer and you're joining a new company, if their technology stack is completely in-house, then you have to spend, potentially a couple of months getting up to scratch and learning how to build for that stack. But as more and more companies use Kubernetes, if you previously have Kubernetes knowledge, you can transfer that from your previous company to a new company. So more and more, I actually see companies saying, we're looking for engineers who are familiar with Kubernetes because we can kind of skip that training period. So I think it's less that you'll never have to know every single thing about the stack, about how you build Kubernetes or how you build any kind of infrastructure. It's more about if you have Kubernetes as a base, and if everybody has Kubernetes on the base as a base, then it's actually good for engineers and developers overall to just learn how it runs and then be able to take that knowledge with them.
No, that makes sense. You're right. It makes the onboarding a lot quicker. So this might be a silly question, and I've got another question lined up from the audience. But just building on what you were just saying, could I use Kubernetes to build a development environment locally? Is that possible, or is it only for running in the cloud?
Yeah, for sure. So there's lots of different tools. One is called Minikube. It's the most popular one, where you can run a Kubernetes cluster locally and you can experiment with it. So you definitely don't have to be using a public cloud.
So I think that's a huge benefit there, where if you go to a project and they say, right, we have, I don't know, you need 30 servers to run this project, then to set that all up locally, you see some places taking ages and doing manual steps and all these things. If I can just run a Kubernetes command and it just builds the environment locally, a bit like, I guess, Vagrant and all those other tools in the past used to do. Okay, Vagrant was just for the VM, but Ansible and all the rest, how we used to get up to speed a lot quicker. So now it sounds that we can, and Docker's so lightweight. The painful thing about running Vagrant and Ansible and you booting up like 10 VMs on your laptop, it would kind of take off and heat the room up. Whereas now with containers, it's so much lighter weight.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you do want to run it locally, I would recommend checking out Minikube.
Minikube, cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so I think I've got the next question. I've already put it up on the screen. My mistake. Cloud Foundry, is that under CNCF? Do you know off the top of your head?
So Cloud Foundry is a sister foundation of CNCF. So we're both under the Linux Foundation as a whole. Cloud Foundry is a more opinionated platform compared to Kubernetes. Kubernetes is kind of, very low, not very, but it's kind of low level abstractions that you can plug in many different ways, depending on what kind of developer experience you have. Cloud Foundry is more like, okay, cloud, the interface between the ops and the devs is a little bit more fixed. So, but Cloud Foundry is, a lot of that is kind of migrating towards the same thing. So now you can run Cloud Foundry on top of Kubernetes. You can run Kubernetes on top of Cloud Foundry. Just a different option.
Cool, makes sense. Shall I bring up your GitHub organization?
Yeah, sure.
So I have got that on another screen somewhere. I'm going to make it a bit bigger as well. And I can share it in the chat as well.
Okay.
Go. So you've got quite a few projects. I think I saw at the top, where is it? 89.
Yeah. So this is kind of interesting because these are not always projects in the open source sense, in the sense of like, these are tools, this is code. A lot of this is around process. So for example, you can see in the pinned repositories, the middle one called the TOC, the Technical Oversight Committee. That one is not really code. Instead, it's mostly a list of documents and processes around how the TOC function. So if you kind of scroll down a bit, you can see the principals, the people who are in it, how they do meetings. Maybe you want to, Eddie, if you want to remove the question from the...
Oh, sorry, I forgot that on there. Thank you.
As well. Yeah, so people can see. And then let's say, okay, so at the bottom of projects, you see the last line is see the process for contributing a project here. If you click on here, then you can see here are the different sort of ways you can contribute, and here's the different things you can do. So even though CNCF has 89 repositories, quite a few of them are like this. They're sort of more documentation than straight on code.
But I think that's fine. I think GitHub and open source has really moved forwards to not just being about code. I see people doing blog posts, recipes. I've written my own open source kind of tips book that is one of my most popular repositories, and that's just kind of markdown. It's ASCII docs, but which is effectively markdown. And so I think this is good. And you still got GitHub issue template. You're still following contributors guide. You're still following the same rules as any other open source project. And I think having documentation open source, I think it's really good. I think this is a positive.
Oh, good. I'm glad. It's just people don't often expect it to work like this. I have to say though that I run my own blog, which is oicheryl.com, off GitHub repo as well. And because I'm the only person who actually contributes to it, I get pretty lazy with writing good comments and doing all the things that you should do for an open source project. So this is run much more in the style of an actual open source project, even though it's document and process more than code.
Nice. I like it. It's good. 35 pull requests. People are obviously, interested in making changes and getting involved. So anyone watching, I do open source live streams. So anyone watching, if you want to get involved and contribute to open source, we can find you some issues in these projects, and you can then start contributing to open source, and we can help you on a live stream. So I'm really keen getting more people contributing. And some people want to contribute code, some want to contribute tests, and some want to practice the flow, and so want to start off with some documentation, and then even some of them really get into documentation and making formatting really consistent through the project. And I think that's why it's great to have a good diverse mix of people with different skills and ambitions, because then not ambitions, goals, because some of them want to improve their documentation skills and so on. So I think that's good that you've got that.
I think that's critical, to be honest, to how these open source projects work. I mean, it's not just code. In fact, it can be much harder to find a good technical writer than it is to just find someone who can code. And I'm sure some people might get upset by me saying that, but honestly, it's very hard to find someone who can express technical concepts simply and well. But if you search in the Find a Repository box, there is one called Contribute. And if you click on that, then scroll down a bit, again, you can see guides for each of the projects and how you should get involved and where you should look. Quite a lot of these projects also follow practices like putting good first time issue or good first timer on as an issue label, so to encourage people to come in and join.
Absolutely. I think that's really good that those issues, because people do search for those issues with good first issue. And I think everyone watching, don't forget, you can, for example, if you want to contribute to Kubernetes, but you don't know Go, you can contribute on the documentation side. And I think it's really important for people who are new to a project to look at the documentation, because they'll find the holes. So whenever I onboard a new person onto a client project, the first thing I do is read the documentation and tell me and try and do the project, try and set it up. And if you can't, then there's something wrong with the documentation. We'll help you figure it out. And then their first contributions to the project can be adding more information to the documentation. So I think if you don't know these projects, a good way to get involved is to try and figure it out. And then when you do figure it out, you'll realize there's things missing probably in documentation. It's just natural that we make assumptions, even at the best of times, when writing documentations for projects that we know.
Totally agree. And I have a thought on that. But first of all, if you want to scroll down a little bit, I'm actually curious what they call Flux.
Let me search for it.
Flux. Oh, just
there
GitOps.
We go. GitOps.
Yeah, okay, fine. GitOps. Okay, so my thought about this, and something that I'd be interested to hear your opinions on, is GitHub itself a difficult barrier for people to cross? Because yes. I think if you're not familiar with GitHub or even with Git, it's a lot, right? Like, what's a pull request? What's an issue?
I think it is. When I'm doing training for, say, GDG Cloud, I'm really bad at assuming GitHub itself is straightforward, because it's kind of lots of white space, it's got big buttons. Ignoring the Git side, say if they're just using the web interface and making edits to a file and hitting submit and so forth, it's still complicated. You're right, because what is a pull request? Why am I making a pull request? I want to give it to you. I'm kind of pushing it to you, and they kind of, it is strange. And so and what's a fork? And so I think GitHub is hard even though once you know it's easy, but then that's probably with a lot of things, right?
Yeah, it totally. I mean, I taught my sister how to use GitHub a little while back. She's not a programmer or developer at all, but I was just curious. And now I've kind of got her somewhat comfortable with the idea of like, okay, if you want to make a change, then you click on this button and then you follow these green buttons and then that's about it. But the minute you kind of go any further than that, it's actually pretty challenging, for people to wrap their heads around what is a branch, that
It's
already is
true.
quite hard.
No, that is true. You're right. And then when you get further into branching, you're right. I try to explain it to people, and it takes them a while to practice and do it often. Like one of my most popular YouTube videos in the shortest amount of time was how to keep this is a bit more technical, but how to keep your fork in sync with the upstream repository. And I think within like the first few days, it got thousands of views, which is, which is a bit strange for my YouTube channel to happen so fast within the first few days. It was just searched a lot for on YouTube. So simple things like that are quite simple when you know how, but it's just going through the flow. I have seen people, they make a fork, they make their change, they push it up to their fork, raise the pull request, which is really good to get that far. But then what they do is they delete the fork and recreate a fork again for their next contribution. Just to kind of miss that step, because it's not very simple. The GitHub documentation is probably one of the best I've seen online. But still, it's the terminology. It's just there's a lot to take on board, and people have certain issues with different computers, different platforms as well, SSH keys and all sorts of things. So I think GitHub might be simple in itself, but then like you said, you've got Git underneath, and you've got the setup of that, you've got your security of that, your SSH keys, or do you do it over HTTPS? And so yeah, I think people have got to be persistent a bit, and then it starts making sense once they've done it a few times.
But this is also, as you said, like this is why beginners should really contribute their experiences, because you kind of forget once you've done something for a while how hard all of this actually is. And only kind of by having that fresh eyes can you think like, okay, if I'm going to make a change, then here's the thing that wasn't clear to me. And that's an incredibly valuable perspective that is very hard to get otherwise. So I also highly encourage people to contribute.
Yeah,
People
there's
tend to
so
think
many
like, oh,
benefits.
unless I'm an expert, unless I'm a genius world expert in this thing, I have nothing to contribute. And I think it's important for people to get over that thought.
Absolutely, and I've just seen this here. It says one issue needs help, so that's really good that GitHub are now exposing that a bit more as well, and it's a clickable link. I haven't seen that before. So putting the right labels on things. Yeah, I might click on it to see what happens, but putting the right label on things, good first issue, help wanted. So definitely get involved. Nice. You'll meet so many awesome people. It's a great way to learn, and it benefits the project even if you're new to it. I have a question for you, Cheryl, is how can we get onto the people's list in here? What do we have to do?
I believe that this is the people who are contributing. So I think you just have to start contributing a lot. I mean, that's kind of easier said than done, right? Like I know people go, I would love to contribute, but where do I even begin? And so actually what I would suggest, before I give my recommendation, Eddie, I'm interested in hearing, how did you get into open source? Like from not just using, but how did you actually start contributing?
It was a long time ago, and it was very different back then. There wasn't a GitHub, and you had to sign, not NDAs, you had to sign something, I can't remember what it was, that you would basically, your work done, you would never go back and charge for it, sort of thing. And it was really quite weird back in the day, and the barrier to entry was really hard. So now with places like GitHub and the licensing, it just makes it so much easier. So I had, I think I found a missing gap in documentation, and I didn't contribute back. And so when I came to use that same part of that component in that library, I think it was Zen Framework going back like 10 or 12 years or something. Then when I came back later on, I had the same problem, and I forgot that I'd solved it before. And as I was searching, I came across my question and my answer. And I just thought, well, this is silly. I've just wasted probably 2 hours back then, a few months ago, and I've wasted 2 hours again. So I thought, right, I'm actually going to make the change, and I had to sign some documents at the time. Nowadays, you don't have to do that. And I made the change, and I just thought, well, okay, now that makes sense. And then people started commenting saying that really helped, thank you so much. And I felt really good about it. Not only did it help me, it helped other people. So then I just started making kind of one-line changes to documentation where they said, I don't know, step 1, do this, step 2, do this, step 3, do this. But I felt there was like a 1B or C missing, so I'll just add an extra line in. And not all of them got accepted, but most of them did. And it just snowballed from there. And then I started my own projects. And I just had so much fun doing it. This week, I don't know if you saw, I got nominated by GitHub.
You're nominated, yeah.
So
for GitHub Star.
Yeah, for a GitHub Star. A few years ago, I was in the top 500 open source contributors in the world on GitHub. So yeah, it's just, I think it becomes a bit addictive, just like, I don't know, playing a game. It felt like a game. And you meet so many new people. I get so many clients from my open source contributions. So I cannot recommend enough, no matter what job people are in, testing, development, not even in tech, like you said. I mean, I had an intern working for me, and she was doing the marketing side, and she got into GitHub, and she was just fixing my English by raising a pull creating a branch, raising a pull request, all via the UI. But this is someone who wasn't in tech, didn't study tech. And when she had a problem or a question, she would just look it up, and the documentation was really quite good, or other people online would help her. And so she got into open source, which is really quite interesting. But yeah,
that's super cool.
I can't recommend enough. What about yourself? How did you get into the open source side?
So I think I got started so at Google, right, people do use open source, but it's quite hard to actually contribute towards open source, mainly because the vast majority of Google's infrastructure is all in-house. It's all proprietary. So there's not actually a lot of open source stuff that really works with that. So I didn't really get into open source until after I'd left Google. And for a while, I was just looking around at, what are the different things that I could do. And that is the point when I decided to make the switch from developer to developer advocate. And I went to a couple of different conferences. I went to several of them on diversity scholarships. So, I'm a big fan of those. And I just kind of started talking to people and seeing, okay, what are the interesting things that are happening? And as a developer advocate, I did a lot of technical talks. I spoke a lot. I started the meetup that I run, Cloud Native London. So that's kind of how I got into the community side of open source. And likewise, I want to stress that there's so many different ways that you can contribute, and contributing by starting a meetup where, 300 people can get together and talk about what they're doing and learn from each other is also immensely valuable. So if you are interested in contributing to open source, I think you should definitely try it. You should definitely go for it, and just sort of be consistent, be helpful, and, just keep at it over time. That's really the only thing that you have to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of people think that you've got to do a big feature for it to be worthwhile doing. But I want to stress, using your words, that the bigger the pull request, the bigger the change you want to make, the less likely it will be accepted. The smaller it is, the more likely it will be accepted. I've seen people say, I'm not going to make this contribution because it's too small. It's like, no, it will get reviewed quickly, it will get merged quickly, and the community can benefit from it quickly. So the smaller you can make it, the better. And I've seen almost on my projects a while ago, draft pull requests that just kept on getting added to and adding to and added to. Like, don't review it yet, it's in draft, keep adding to it. And it makes it a lot harder to review when there is so much to go through and test and all the rest. So the smaller, the better. It just needs to make it better or solve a small problem, and then you can what I would call lower fidelity, and you can add a higher fidelity to it later on. I mean, to give an example, I haven't looked at this project, but I just see SVG auto crop. To just take image cropping for an example, you might want to do repositioning, you might want to do resizing, cropping, etc. But just resizing alone is enough for a feature. Don't think about the cropping and the repositioning. Later on, you can add more features to it. It needs to just add benefit with as small amount of work as possible.
Absolutely, like totally right. Keep things small, keep things, well scoped, and that will go a long way towards getting those contributions in. And I also want to make the point that from the CNCF point of view, from the foundation's point of view, a contributor is also includes people who've not just done pull requests and commits, but have also done issues or have commented on issues. Like even a line saying, yes, we've seen this or whatever, like that is a contribution towards making that project better.
Absolutely, you're right. If you've got an issue, a bug, and then someone's already raised it, and you just say, "Well, I had this too, and this is my situation, like my setup, whatever it was," that just adds so much value to that ticket. So, yes, that is all massively adding value. Raising an issue does get you that green square. Putting a comment, I don't think gets you the green square. I know people at the beginning like to chase the green squares, and I do kind of get that. So, raising an issue or a commit or pull request do give you a green square, but other things do add value. And then if you just start adding value, people will help you more. If you want to add more value, you need some more help and guidance along that.
And also, Eddie, perhaps this is something that you're very aware of as a developer advocate, but maybe other people are not so aware, is that much like kind of, everything else in the real world, like in today's world, the more you can kind of help other people through creating content, whether that's written or YouTube videos or Twitter or podcast or like whatever, people get to know you, and then people will start to come to you about like, how do I get involved with this? And that's how you build your own visibility within open source.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I recommend that.
Than just coding, you've got the whole social side, but adding value, not, hey, here's a picture of me on Twitter brushing my teeth. It's got to be, this is a problem I had, this is how I solved it, or here's a great blog post that I read. Doesn't even have to be your own, it could be someone else's. I like using Twitter to filter the amount of content out there that's good. I want the good stuff to bubble up to the top. So no, you're absolutely right. You definitely want to stand out there so you can get the jobs that you want, the money that you want, or the flexibility that you want. Whatever is important to you, I think it's important to put yourself out there. And also asking questions in the live stream, people recognizing your name, and next time you ask a question, and if you ever do a tweet and the name comes up, they're more likely to help you engage because you've asked a question or got engaged and got involved yourself. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, totally, 100%. And I want to thank the people who've put in questions already. So again, like I see you, and I really appreciate that you're willing to put yourself out there and ask questions, which is hard.
And I apologize if I have missed some questions. I have asked people to copy and paste them back in because there were a few that I missed. I can't find it in the chat now. So please do. We've got a few minutes left. I don't want to go on for too much longer. I've taken up loads of Cheryl's time already. But if there's any burning questions, do ask. And if you don't want to ask in the chat, ask in Discord, and I can find out the answer for you on your behalf as well. So do let us know. But this looks really interesting. It's good to see that you've got other projects that aren't just Go and so forth. There's a PHP one, JavaScript, Ruby, Java, Crystal. So it's really good to see other projects as well, like Shell and so forth. And they're all really active. So, I mean, this whole first page of projects, don't know how many there are. There must be 20 or 30, but they've all been updated within the last 12 days, which is really, or most of them within the last week.
This is what we do as an open source foundation. We try and put everything out there onto GitHub as much as possible, because then you've got the transparency and people can trust that they can see what's going on. And actually, if you could go to that link that I had at the end, the cncf.io/techradar. Go back one from there.
Back one, sorry. Yep, this one.
Back one. Yeah, click on that.
Okay, it's opening the wrong. I've got too many screens. It's opening the wrong one. Let me go back here.
Open this link, yeah. And you can just kind of scroll down towards the bottom a bit, and you can see people are actively discussing this. They're saying, here's how I want to see this. And I'm really, really grateful, and I really love the fact that people are giving this feedback, because this is how we make things better.
There's my contribution.
Yeah,
I do agree. That was one of my thoughts, was PDF. It's not very, it's very enterprisey, as in businessy, but not very techy. So yeah, I have some ideas around that as well.
I'm actively working on an interactive web version. So as it was the very first version, it was like, okay, let's just get it out quickly. So it's basically a graphic, but definitely want to improve on this. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom,
oh wow,
yeah, up just a tiny bit more.
Chaos engineering, nice. A big discussion on that another time, I think.
So if you scroll up, you can see like people are just +1ing things that they're interested in. So I really recommend like go and just thumbs up things you want to hear about or things you want to see.
Nice. I'm going to thumbs up that chaos engineering, because that is really, really interesting.
Yeah, totally.
Especially with
Thank you for your contribution, Eddie.
No problem at all. You're welcome. I'm hopefully going to do some more, and I do like to pick open source projects and show people how to contribute to them. So I will be picking some of yours, and I do tell them that, you know, not everything has to be accepted as a pull request. It's still a contribution. They might choose not to accept it, but they've made the decision, a conscious decision, that it's not relevant for that project or for whatever reason, but it's more of a conscious decision rather than they weren't aware of it in the first place. So I think it's it's really important. If you're unsure, definitely make the contribution, and worst case doesn't get accepted, but you'll still get your green square, so it's okay. You'll be right.
It's the most important thing, right?
Exactly. I think we do have one last question, but I do think it's a bigger question, bigger topic. I'll bring it up for people to see, but I do think it's a bigger discussion for another time, which is, when does it make sense to containerize your application versus just hosting it normally?
I've never really thought about it in terms of the size of the application, actually. I've always thought about it in the sense of, are you going to be changing the environment that you're running this application in? Like, if your application is always on your laptop, it doesn't really, you don't need to do anything special to it. But if one day you're going to move it off your laptop to running it on some testing servers and then running it on production servers, every time you do that move will be painful if you have to reset the environment every time and you have to retest in a new environment. So if you know that you're going to be moving, or let's say you're today running it on-prem and then you want to run it on the cloud in the future, then if you could containerize it, you just solve all of that pain. So that's how I would think about it.
Okay, that makes sense. I am conscious of time. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Cheryl?
No, I don't think so. I think this has been a really, really great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you, Eddie.
I really enjoyed it too. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat to me and my community about this great initiative that you're doing. And I had such great discussion on it, and I'm really excited. I've made some little notes on the side of things I want to go and research after the call as well and have a look into. I still am blown away by how many projects you've got that aren't just code. I really see that as a positive. So thank you so much for taking the time, and hopefully get you on in the future, maybe later on in the year. You can let us know how the second radar has gone, what you've learned from it. And I will be keeping an eye on this issue as well to see what people vote on. So everyone watching, thank you for your questions, and don't forget, let me share the link to this and have a look, and don't forget to vote on this. And we can also continue the discussion, like I said, in the Discord between live streams and between videos as well. Cheryl, thank you very much. Thank you so much again. I'm going to put the holding page up. So stay on the line, and then I will switch back and we have a quick catch up at the end, if that's okay, if you've got a few minutes still.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I will see you on another live stream very soon. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thanks again.